We can continue with our program. The next presentation is on satire. Louis, my colleague, has prepared a short presentation, and afterwards we will have a talk with Fritz Jergitsch. He is a famous comedian, editor-in-chief of a satirical website, and I'm happy that we have him with us. He will join us in a couple of minutes. And he just released a book on social media, so he was the online person of the year, and he's also an expert on social media. So I think we will have an interesting talk with him and also an interesting discussion. But now, Louis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. So, good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this panel on recent developments on satire and caricature. And I'm also happy that later we will welcome a chief editor of a famous satirical magazine. But first, we would like to show you some interesting cases where the Austrian Press Council had to deal with caricatures in the media in the last years. As Alex said, I'm also working for the Press Council since 2018, including publicity work, and I will give you a short overview now. In the statistics, we have around 2 to 3 cases each year where readers make a complaint regarding a satire or a caricature in the media coverage. And since then, the 3 senates of the Austrian Press Council have established a stable decision-making practice when it comes to satirical formats. In generally, our senates keep saying that both the freedom of expression and the freedom of art should be interpreted widely when it comes to caricatures and satire. And in most decisions, they keep saying in satire, criticism of people or events is exercised through exaggeration, irony, and biting ridicule. Distortions, sarcasm, and cynicism are characteristic or typical for satirical formats. And that's why the freedom of expression has to be interpreted widely. Of course, in the past years, there have been some cases where a satire or a caricature affected the Austrian press code. And in these borderline cases, the senates keep saying that the factual basis can be decisive. And that's why in these cases, they examine if there is a concrete factual basis. And if there is, mostly the freedom of expression is still in the majority. As you can see, there are some cases where the senates established this decision-making practice. And now I will show you some examples. The first decision I'm showing you is from 2019. In this case, the Senate too had to deal with a caricature that was published in the weekly magazine Krone Bund, which is part of the famous Austrian tabloid Kronenzeitung. And it showed 2 rats sitting in a room drinking alcohol. As you can see, the one is sitting on the couch, obviously smoking, and the other one is standing in the back and holding its hands like pointing out a gun. And the title of this caricature was Rats with Corruption Background. As some of you may have already noticed, this caricature is a reference to the so-called Ibiza video. In in this video, the former Vice Chancellor of Austria, HC Strache, was on a finca in Ibiza with his party colleague Johann Gudenus. They were both back then party members of the Austrian right-wing party FPÖ, and they met a rich Russian lady there and talked about possible future deals in the future, such as buying the Kronenzeitung. And what they didn't know was that this video was recorded, and that the Russian lady was actually an actress. The video was published 2 years later in 2019 and became quite a scandal. It was published by the German newspapers Süddeutsche Zeitung and Spiegel, and it led to the dissolution of the former Austrian government. So it was pretty clear when you watch the caricature that this is a reference to the Ibiza video. On the other hand, the Senate had also to deal with the question if it is ethical or legitimate to show these two politicians as rats in these satirical formats. The problem was there that in the past already the Senate had said that it is unethical to use the term rat for people, for human beings in the media coverage. Since already in the Nazi regime, the term rats was used for Jews or other minorities to dehumanize them. So that's why our Senate say that the term rat is actually a violation of the Austrian Press Code. So in this case, the Senate had to examine if there is any factual basis in this special case to show the politicians as rats. And actually, a few weeks ago, before the Ibiza video was published, the regional party of the FPÖ in Braunau had published a poem which was called Die Stadtratte, that means the rat of town. And in this poem, migrants and asylum seekers were compared to rats. And this poem also had the text line, rat with a migration background. And so that's why the Senate came to the conclusion that in this case, there is enough factual basis, since this caricature can also be seen, besides the Ibiza video, as a reference to this poem. But it must be said that it was not an easy decision, and not all members of the Senate agreed. So this was quite a discussion, but in the end, the majority of the Senate said this is not a violation of the Austrian Press Code. Another case I'm showing you is this caricature that was published in 2020. It was published on an online website of an Upper Austrian newspaper, and it showed the chairwoman of the Social Democratic Party as a girl jumping out of a cake and just wearing underwear. You can see in her hand she's holding a shield where it was written on demands, and this caricature had the title The New Package. Again, the Senate had to deal with the question if there is any factual basis in this case, showing the chairwoman Pamela Rendi-Wagner as a girl jumping out of a cake and only wearing underwear by that. Actually, during this time, the Social Democratic Party released a list of demands in relation to the coronavirus crisis. And this list of political demands included, for example, a minimum pay of 1,700 euros or a 4-day week for workers. And some experts and politicians of other parties criticized that these are actually demands which are pretty old by the Social Democratic Party, and now they are just presented as new demands. And this why, again, the Senate came to the conclusion that since this caricature has the title, The New Package, there is a factual basis to show her in this way. It must be mentioned that this caricature became quite a scandal in the public. Some female minister criticized it and said it is sexist. Also, the reader who made the complaint to the press council criticized it as sexist. And yeah, the Senate also noted and said in its discussion that this caricature has some sexist elements, but still it is a caricature, and that's why the freedom of expression and the freedom of art need to be interpreted widely. And also this newspaper published 2 readers' letters by female politicians where they criticized it, and this was also seen as a positive sign by the Senate. The last case I'm showing you is a pretty new statement, which we just published this week. It shows the Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, and his Interior Minister on a soccer field, and they both wear soccer dresses, and on the floor, instead of a ball, there is a person sitting. And as you can see in the back, the soccer goal has the title Afghanistan, and there are standing some soldiers in front of the soccer goal. It was published in the Austrian daily newspaper Der Standard, and some readers made a complaint to the press council, and they criticized it, especially because the person on the floor is shown as a thing, and they say it dehumanizes asylum seekers. Also in this case, it was pretty clear to the Senate that there is a factual basis. This caricature was published in the beginning of July 2021. This was already the time when the political situation in Afghanistan was pretty tense, and some experts have already warned that the Taliban might take over the power soon again. And during this time, both Sebastian Kurz and Karl Nehammer kept saying in public that they will continue deportations to Afghanistan. And also in this caricature, as you can see, the Interior Minister says to Sebastian Kurz, "This is our deportation kick." And that's why the Senate came to the conclusion that the painter of this caricature expresses his criticism, and according to this caricature, the politic and attitude by Sebastian Kurz and Karl Nehammer can be seen as inhuman, and asylum seekers are not seen as persons anymore. So in general, you can see that the Austrian Press Council is pretty tolerant when it comes to satire and caricature. That's why in the end, I want to show you a decision by the German Press Council, our neighbors, where a satirical format was seen as a violation of the press code. Maybe later our colleagues from Germany can tell us more about it. On this satirical format, you can see the Pope. It was published in the German satirical magazine Titanic. On the cover of this magazine, and you can see the former Pope Benedict XVI as incontinent and with feces, and it had the title "Another Leak Has Been Found." This was published in 2012. During this time, there were some scandals in the Vatican coming out, the so-called Fati leaks, and some readers made a complaint. I think there were a lot of readers, more than 180 readers, went to the German Press Council and criticized it. And in this case, the German Press Council came to the conclusion that this caricature is a violation of the German Press Council. it said that it violates the dignity of the Pope, and there is not enough factual basis to the scandals in the Vatican. Yeah, maybe our colleagues can tell us more about this case, but for now I say thanks for your attention, and I'm very happy that we will welcome now Fritz Jergitsch from Austria's most famous satirical magazine, Die Tagespresse. And by the way, all the decisions and cases I just showed you from the Austrian Press Council, you can also find on our website, of course. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Luis, for this interesting introduction into the topic. And once again, I'm happy that Fritz Jergitsch is with us. He's quite busy these days because he just released his book 2 days ago on social media. I think the title is The Ghosts I Shared. So you were talking about the danger of social media. Maybe we will come back to that topic later on. But as a start, I would like to know if you would agree with the German Press Council that this satirical picture of Pope Benedict with the yellow spot on his robe was too much. And do you think that there are certain borders, or do you think that the press councils should think more liberal and take into consideration that humor has no borders?
Maybe Manfred Protze, who is actually from the German Press Council, raised his hand. I think he wants to say something to this.
Yeah, but maybe we make the discussion later on. We just continue with Fritz Jergitsch now, and later on we discuss everything together. The examples by Luis, and also the input from Fritz Jergitsch.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I can't really comment on whether I agree with his decision, because I don't know what their, rules are and what their how they approach these type of questions. Is it too much? I mean, personally, I think, our approach to this topic is that for us, a joke has to be funny. And if it's funny, we also accept provocation, a provocative statement to some extent. So personally, we wouldn't publish something just for the sake of provocation. Our definition of satire is mainly it's something funny, but also something that's criticizing something. And if the message is, if we feel like the message is important, if we feel like the joke is justified, we will also accept to be provocative, or also we will also dare to be provocative.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Fritz. Maybe could you tell us, or could you tell the international audience a bit about your magazine, how it is set up, how many people work there? You have, I think, about 9,000 subscriptions, and you live mostly on that subscriptions. You have also a bit of advertising, but maybe you can give us some figures and some facts about this magazine, which is really well known in Austria, and it's quite a success. And you have developed it for many, many years, but now it's just part of the media sector, I would say.
Well, essentially, we're a group of people who like to read the news and who are interested in current affairs. And every day we just look at what's the most relevant topic to us, and we think of some type of joke. I started it 2013 by myself, and after 1 year, I hired someone to write with me. We're now, I think, 6, 7 people. It depends. Some people write less, other people write more, but we're about 7, 8 people who just like to write satire about current events. Occasionally, we write about something that's not really tied to anything happening right now, but I would say we write mostly political satire. We offer subscriptions to readers, so that's how we kind of finance our own activities. We have 9,000 subscribers. and we reach about 500,000 readers every month. We use something called a metered paywall. So essentially, it means you can read 3 articles for free every month. And after those 3 articles are used up, a prompt tells you need a subscription. And that's a cool model because it actually allows us to kind of, take in all the bypassing traffic from people who just want to read 1 article. We don't lose that. And at the same time, if you want to read more of us, you can do so if you support us.
All right, yeah. Of course, you have also written articles on COVID-19. You cannot avoid it. It's the biggest topic in the media for many months now. And we have also many complaints at the press councils on that topic. Did you get any reactions of the readers? How did that develop? How did you select the topics, and how did you present this problem?
Mm-hmm. My stance on satire and humor in general is that it really helps us in kind of processing what's going on in the world. In English, we say, you say to make light of a bad situation when you make a joke. And I think that tells you a lot about what humor does in our brain. So when Corona started and we started writing about Corona and how Corona impacted our lives, I wasn't surprised at all to see how our clicks, our readership just increased dramatically. So we have never been afraid to write about Corona. We've never been afraid to criticize things we don't like. We also have a very clear stance on vaccinations. So we're not trying to say, oh well, there's this big group that thinks this and the other group that thinks that, and we sort of have to agree with both parties. No, we're very much in our stance on vaccinations, for example, because we also believe, satire is something subjective. You cannot write an objective satire. When you make a joke about something, you kind of already have your own subjective opinion influencing that joke.
Yeah, all right. Do you have specific target groups? Do you think of your readers when you select the topic? Or how is the editorial process? Do you have in mind who will read it, or do you have some orientation? How do you do that?
We don't really focus on any target groups. The idea behind that is we are writers, we are creative writers, and we can only write jokes that we find funny ourselves. And occasionally, of course, we look at what kind of topics are interesting to our readership, but essentially when it comes down to it, to the jokes, we just try to write jokes that we would laugh about ourselves. It's not really, it wouldn't really be sensible for us to kind of narrow down a target group. We've always just focused on doing whatever we think is funny, writing about things that are relevant to us and that we think are relevant to the country. And I think we've been doing that from the start.
Do you think that satire and caricatures are in danger somehow? Is there a crisis, like the New York Times decided not to publish caricatures any longer because there is the danger that it's not politically correct? Or you had discussions in the Süddeutsche Zeitung on presenting Mr. Netanyahu as a dog, I think, and they said it's anti-Semitic. And so there is some trend maybe that the newspapers don't dare to release or to publish caricatures, satirical input. Do you think there is that danger, or do you think in those times where everything is so divided, caricature and satire, they will have a new spring, so to speak?
Well, I would say there's of course pressure on comedy and satire. I would also say though that, I mean, cultural norms, they have changed over thousands of years, and humor and satire have essentially always been around at any time in human history. Sometimes the pressure was stronger, like, I don't know, during the Dark Ages, when Inquisition, when people were burned for making perhaps a joke about God or Jesus. Right now, of course, we're seeing a shift of norms towards a more, individualistic approach of looking at, I don't know, things like gender, LGBT, and so on. And of course, that group also has very firm opinions on what jokes, what topics you should joke about and what not. Personally, that doesn't really affect us. We still make jokes about what we think is right or wrong. However, we personally, we have our own views on LGBTQ, for example. We do think their issues need to be supported and need to be made visible. So making a joke about LGBTQ people that kind of degrades them wouldn't really feel funny to us. So that's how we are also kind of taking over the changing norms, because we're a part of society. I will say one thing though. We were in Europa Forum AIPCE in August. That's an event where people gather in the Austrian Alps for 2 weeks, and we were hired to make jokes about the things going on. And I was very surprised to find that especially the younger people there, the students, they were really angry about some of our jokes we made. There were armed Tyrolean guards patrolling the village of Alpbach, and we essentially made a joke saying, well, don't worry, it's not the Taliban, it's just the Tyrolean Schützen. And people were furious why we would make a joke about Afghanistan and why we would degrade the fate of the Afghan people. So I do see that there are a lot of groups that are very, very intolerant towards anything that they find remotely offensive, even if they're not affected.
Mm-hmm. Has there ever been any pressure put on you? Did any politician call you and said, that was too much, we don't like it, what did you do? You should apologize for it. Are there any interferences from outside when you publish something?
There is one big advantage to being funded by subscriptions and not being funded by public advertising or by raking in subsidies from the government, which is no one can actually call you and muscle you into doing anything that you don't want to do. So politicians don't call us because they know they don't have anything to pressure us. They don't have any muscle on us. So, if they wanted, they could call and I would listen to them, but it wouldn't really affect my thinking. Like if they called and said, hey, that joke, that's not fair because of this and that. And I said, I didn't say it like that.
You would discuss
if I was convinced, if I was convinced, let's put it that way. If I was convinced by logical reasoning that, perhaps a joke was morally not right, of course, that would change our thinking. But if I had the feeling that someone would just try to use power to kind of change our positions or change our editorial policies, we would strongly reject that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe could you tell us about one or two stories you personally liked a lot, which you found really funny? So maybe give us some examples, because many people don't know your website and your magazine, your online magazine. So maybe you can tell us a bit about it to get an impression of what kind of work you do.
So one of our most read articles was a story about how the Austrian Post Service has retrieved a letter of acceptance addressed to Adolf Hitler for being accepted to the Academy of Arts. And for me, to me, that's a perfect example of how we can say so much using so little words when you're doing satire, because essentially just using half a sentence, we have blamed the Austrian Post Service for causing World War II. And some people believed it. Some people were furious on Twitter, writing about how stupid the post office people were for causing Second World War. And that was read, I think, 1.5 million times. And at that time, I think it was 2015, and was actually the third most read article in the whole region of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland for that particular year. So I think that's my personal favorite.
Right. And recently you sued a politician, a member of the Austrian Parliament from the People's Party Conservative, Mr. Hanger, because you said he's doing unfair competition because he's doing satire, and it's unfair because he doesn't really declare it as satire or something like that. Can you tell us a bit about that background, and how did you have that idea? That was just some weeks ago, and it was big in the media, big in the news. And could you tell us what the court said and how the politician, Mr. Hanger, reacted, and maybe also why did you choose him?
Well, it all started with us receiving 710 euro in public advertising money. That's a practice we reject, and we didn't want to keep that money.
And why was that? They booked some advertising with you, or?
Exactly, yeah. They booked advertisement with us. We have like an agency that handles that for us. So we only saw it afterwards that we actually got like a few hundred euros from the Minister of Finance and a few hundred euros from the Chancellery. So we said, okay, let's put it back. And then I saw, let's give it back to the original owner, which is like taxpayer. And then we noticed that actually suing someone at the Viennese Court of like Commerce is actually just slightly more expensive than that. So we decided to just sue someone. And we chose Andreas Sanger because he's been doing like very destructive politics. He's been very destructive in his attempts to kind of stop the opposition from kind of uncovering things that happened in the wake of the AIPCE video. So you know, we thought, our thinking was, well, he's always saying all this crazy stuff. Actually, it's so much more sensible to think of him as a satirist. And if he is a satirist, you know, he has to declare that he's a satirist by wearing some kind of button on his shirt. And that's essentially what the lawsuit is trying to do. We're essentially trying to make him wear a button saying, I'm a satirist, just so he doesn't fool people anymore.
And how did the court react?
Well, initially they accepted the lawsuit, which essentially meant that it met certain requirements, and it wasn't like completely out of this world.
So that was a bit unusual, maybe, because many people would have expected that they would not accept it at all, but that was not the case.
It's not that difficult to get a lawsuit accepted. Like if you sued your neighbor because of rain, that wouldn't get accepted. But if it's in the realm of possibilities,
okay,
then they have to accept it actually. So that wasn't the difficult part. And right now we're waiting for a date to have like a hearing, like a public hearing where the lawyer of Mr. Hanger and us will be, and we will exchange our views. However, that's been taking like 4 or 5 weeks now. And I gather, you know, the court is busy with like bogus lawsuits from the ÖVP against various media outlets, unfortunately. So the court hasn't had time yet to deal with our very serious lawsuit.
But for sure you have had some publicity with that. And not only with that, there was something else going on recently. You were faking some news. You said that Mr. Stronach, a rich business manager and former politician, will be a candidate for president for the upcoming elections. And you made up a website announcing his candidature. And I think after that, the media, they called you, and you answered as if you were the spokesperson of this guy. And you said, yes, of course, it's true. And even the Austrian press agency made an article on that, and many other news outlets, many newspapers in Austria wrote articles on it as well. And as far as I know, some journalists were not very happy that you were pretending being the spokesperson of this guy. So how did that happen? happen, and how did you have that idea, and why did you do it? And can you maybe also understand the anger of the journalists that you were fooling them around?
Mm-hmm. The whole thing was basically an experiment to see how little content is actually needed to create a credible candidacy. So we sat down for 2 hours and we made a fake website announcing Frank Stronach as a candidate for the president of Austria. And the whole website, there were like a lot of words, but none of them actually made sense. So that was the whole point, to just fill a website with complete nonsense and like neuro-linguistic PR, essentially bullshit. And I wasn't really surprised that the media believed us when we told them it's real. And when I actually had phone calls with journalists pretending to be the spokesperson of Frank Stronach, and I wasn't surprised that we managed to trick them, to fool them, because we actually bought the original domain of his old party. So it looked very credible. And I essentially lied to them on the phone saying it's real. I was surprised though how like not even the professionals, not even the political professionals, the journalists actually, thought it was weird that someone would run for the most important office in Austria and then not even have like any type of ideas or any type of program for what he wants to do when he's a president. So I don't know. I didn't think that I didn't have the impression that most journalists were angry. I assume some maybe were angry, but we were contacted actually by a lot of media people saying like, "Well, congrats," and that was really awesome, and kind of like they were kind of happy that we showed them, and I found that interesting that they would be happy about that, because actually, if you think about it, we have damaged, at least a little bit, we've damaged your credibility in times of Corona, in times of QAnon, vaccination conspiracies, and so on. But yeah, again, as I said, I think it tells you, the whole thing tells you not so much about media, which, humans make mistakes. They could have called Frank Stronach, of course, but they wanted to be the fastest, and I guess that was shown as well by this whole thing. But I think the most important lesson is for me personally was that you can just run for president and sit down for 2 hours and people will think, wow, that's a serious candidate for the presidency. So I thought that was weird.
Yeah, it was weird, and the Austrian press agency said it was a disaster for them. So they will check now to do a better job. And the whole story reminds me a bit of another comedian, Helmut Qualtinger. He was a famous comedian in the 50s and 60s, and he presented himself as Mr. Kobuk, a writer from Alaska or from the Arctic or something like that. And he arrived at the Vienna station with a fur and dressed like an exotic guy. And he gave a press conference, and all the newspapers were writing about this famous Arctic writer. So I think there is some tradition in Austria to fool the media as a comedian, as far as I can see. But it reminded me a lot of that story, which is a long time ago.
It must be such an honor for Mr. Qualtinger to be compared to us.
Yeah,
it must be like...
exactly. Now, Mr. Qualtinger, you have to know, is a very, very famous comedian, one of the most famous of the 20th century. Unfortunately, he died a long time ago. But I'd like to come back, as I said in the beginning, to your book on social media. And as far as I know, I didn't read the book, it's just released, but I have read some stories about it. And as far as I know, you're very critical on social media. Why is that? And isn't it a little bit dishonest because you became big through social media? I think you have been also some years ago the online person of the year or something like that. You got an award or something like that. And you're an online magazine, so you are completely connected to the online world, and now you're criticizing. Why is that? And yeah, maybe you can clarify a bit.
I totally understand how it can seem weird, and I wanted to address that with the title. So the title says, "The ghosts I shared" or "The ghosts I divided," depending on how you read it. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's already the first person singular there, indicating that, you know, I have to and still profit a lot from how social media works. Now, in my book, I argue that it wouldn't really make sense for us to boycott or ban social media completely. That's like arresting drug dealers, you know, and the next day there's a new drug dealer standing on the street of the corner. And why is that? Because a drug dealer just handles a basic demand. The demand doesn't disappear when you take away the drug dealer. Likewise, the demand for us to communicate on the internet doesn't disappear when we ban or boycott Facebook. People will just move to another social network. So essentially what I argue for regulation of social media, especially targeting the way their algorithms work, because I think their algorithms are having really, really dramatic effects on us as a society. They transport a lot of fake news. They're basically built to transport fake news onto our screens. They drive fearful content, and they polarize us, they divide us. That's why I think, you know, we would really take a good hard look at how we regulate social media better.
All right, Fritz, thank you very much for your interesting input. I would like to open the discussion and ask the audience if there is any question to Fritz Jergitsch. Pierre Gantz, please.
Sorry. I must confess that I am quite a little uncomfortable with this topic because we're talking about satire and caricature, and I think that the main issue of both is about freedom of speech and not about journalist ethic. I think if the French Council would be have a complaint about such a caricature, we will analyze it as a piece of journalism, of course, but of opinion journalism, like a column. And we think that the journalist has his liberty to comment through drawings, to go far in drawing, and it's not an ethics issue. We had suit in court in France, and I think the question is to respect the freedom of speech of people, and not to blame, to attack people for their race, religion, and so on. And if we had suit in France, you have law issue in France, it was about this point. So I am not sure that it's a main point for journalism ethic.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. I think it's a specific topic for media ethics. There are specific standards, and it's part of media ethics. Maybe Fritz Jergitsch, do you consider yourself as a journalist or as a comedian, or as both? But do you feel connected to the journalistic world, or what you say? Because some people say that what you are doing is oftentimes fake news. It's not true. It's satirical, but it's not true. So it's not journalism anymore. Or how do you see that?
I think we're comedians in the sense that we joke. And I think we're journalists in the sense that every joke we make also transports some type of truth. I think that's the essence of every joke, that it kind of transports the truth in a very surprising way. Mm. So in that way, I think we're a bit of both, without completely fitting in one category.
And you're very much connected to politics, to culture and sports. So you follow you have to follow the news and analyze it. It's not that you're just making jokes out of the blue. So somehow it's a kind of journalistic work, I would say, but a special kind of journalistic work.
Yes. So as I said, every joke we make needs to have some sort of relation to the truth. Like we couldn't just write a satirical article saying Sebastian Kurz has robbed the bank. Like, no one would say like, well, how's that funny, you know? Or we could make a joke about how, I don't know, Sebastian Kurz looks at his phone at the UN General Assembly while Joe Biden speaks, right? So people have seen that, and we can make a joke about that. We can say, I don't know, he was interrupted by Biden while he was playing Candy Crush, and people, you know, people will understand that. People will find it funny because, you know, it kind of transports the truth, which is that he looked at his phone in the UN General Assembly, which is kind of a weird thing to do while a US president is speaking.
All right, Tarmo, you want to comment or ask a question?
Yes, thank you. I'm Tarmo Tammer from Estonia, and Fritz, thank you very much for the interesting talk. You talked about the changing norms of society and the changing culture, and you know the cancelling culture that seems to spread more and more. Have you, because of this pressure that you feel in society about certain topics, have you ruled out some topics from your field of activity, so to speak, because of that? Or have you kind of set up different new standards for yourself, like not making jokes about certain topics because societal norms have changed considerably over the past 5 years or so?
That's a good question. There is no topic that we wouldn't joke about, like a priori. Essentially, no topic we would joke about before even, you know, thinking about what we could write. We wouldn't exclude anything. Of course, there are topics where we think really hard if, you know, if we stand behind that message. Like when we would write about something that's somehow related to, I don't know, gay rights, let's say, or when we write about feminism, we think really hard if the message that we want to send out, if that's actually something that we really believe in and we can stand behind. Because those are the fronts where the norms are changing, right? And our own view, it's not really a big problem for us because our own views change as well, right? I mean, 15 years ago, there were completely different standards for making jokes about gay people. And today, like when you watch the sitcom 2.5 Men, and every second joke is like something about women being sexual objects or gay men being gay. And today, you know, when you watch 2.5 Men, you think like, oh, what were they thinking when they wrote that? But you know, there are different norms back then. And I watch 2.5 Men today, and I can chuckle about it. But you know, I also notice how the norms in society, but also my own norms have changed. So I wouldn't write that type of joke anymore because I personally just don't find it funny anymore.
It's actually that you have ruled out some topics. This is like censorship internal.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Is it like internal censorship still? About
there's sometimes some self-censorship in your editorial department.
Well, I think our censorship is basically what do we find funny, and if we don't find it funny, we don't bring it. I mean, you could call that censorship, but you know, for us, it's just our normal content guidelines. You just not joke about things we just don't find funny. We don't have censorship in the way that we say, well, that's a really funny joke, but let's not write about it because, you know, this particular group of people could be angry about it. And we constantly get messages from people who are kind of affected by it, who kind of the target of a joke, and they don't like it. Like one time we wrote how the Austrian Chamber of Commerce is basically recommending to not make your own gifts anymore, but only buy gifts to boost economy. And we actually got a message, an angry message from a guy owning a handicraft store, essentially saying, well, you know, satire, you know, joke whatever you want about, but not about handicraft stores. So that kind of shows how, you know, everyone has their own norms of what kind of jokes are acceptable and then what are not.
I see. Yeah. Manfred, you had to wait some time for your statement, or maybe you have a question to Fritz Jergitsch also.
It's not directly to colleague Jergitsch. The intro asked me for some more information about the case of Pope. So I will give some more information. But first, I agree fully with colleague Jergitsch and colleague Gans from France, yes, that caricature and satire is in general part of freedom of expression, but for us it's clear, if it happens in the context of journalism, it must be accessible for the norms of the code. And so we handle it. Second, I fully agree that cartoons or caricatures must be funny, but I hope we agree, we never would accept to separate the function from the fun, as far as human beings are involved. That means it is an important aspect that, and a part of journalism, that cartoons open the possibility to get new points of view, unexpected new points of view. This is the kind of provocation which we estimate as an important contribution to the cultural dispute. And the Pope case, in our eyes, was a case in which the function was partially separated from the fun, and insofar there was kind of abuse or misuse of a human being just for fun. Why? It's the factual base for this cartoon was indeed a leak in the Vatican, a breach of trust.
A leak of information, yeah?
Yeah, a leak of information, but a leak is a leak. And the cartoonist shows us a so-called leak in the person of the Pope, and graphically marked by these colored spots on the uniform of the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we decided at least that regarding that the Pope as the person, this is the person beyond the uniform, exists still. He is not split in a private person and in a public uniformed Pope person. This is unity always, and that means this cartoon with marked spots in brown and yellow plays with a fact which is clear older men have often more problems of controlling the bladder as younger. This is a fact. And so, in our opinion, the cartoon targets not only the leak of the Vatican administration, but it targets also the personal dignity of the real person, Benedict. So this is the reason why we did not accept this cartoon.
Fritz Jergitsch, do you think that there are limits for satirical articles? Would you agree that there are ethical limits like human dignity, that there are certain borders? Of course, you have more freedom because of freedom of expression and of freedom of art, but there are certain limits anyway, or do you think it's limitless? I ask Fritz Jergitsch now.
Sorry.
When I'm asking about the limits of satire, I always think back to that handicraft store owner who told us we shouldn't joke about handicraft stores. Because that example really shows how everyone has a completely own definition of what kind of jokes are acceptable and what not. And usually those views tend to correlate because, you know, it's tied to societal norms. And you know, each of us, for example, would agree that, let's say, murder is unacceptable. So, you know, jokes about murder are not funny, are found not funny. So that's how, you know, these norms correlate. But still, you know, there are these nuances of differences within everybody that you can't really, for us, you can't really say which topic is absolutely off limits. At least to us, every time we make a joke, we ask ourselves, is this a joke that we can stand behind? Is this a joke that, you know, still allows us to take a look in the mirror? And if we think so, the joke goes out the door, you know?
Okay, but you have this process, so somehow you are also reflecting on what you choose. So somehow there is a thought on it.
Yeah, it's mainly a question of your own gut feeling. So, you know, when we're making a joke that we feel like, oh, that's, you know, that's not a joke we want to make, you know, you have that feeling in your gut already. You know, you still want to be, you know, you still want to be a good person.
Right.
So, for example, we wouldn't write about, I don't know, we wouldn't make fun about, I don't know, people who say die of COVID or victims of a plane crash. Like why would you make joke about a victim of a plane crash?
I would say that's kind of a limit then also somehow, you know, even if you don't call it ethical limit, but you think about it and you reflect, you would not go for any joke. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There are certainly jokes we wouldn't go for. I just wouldn't say that there's like this universally applicable law that's engraved in stone. Like I think of these things as very flexible concepts that only exist in our mind. So I think, you know, we wouldn't joke about victims of plane crash, but, you know, if the plane is not found by the authorities for months, you know, we can joke about the authorities not finding the plane. So that's how even a topic like a plane crash, as tragic as a plane crash, could still offer room for us as satirists to make a point.
Right. Peter Knappen, you were on the line for a long time, I think.
Yeah, just I want to add that I think this last thing is probably more a matter of good taste instead of journalistic ethics. But I wanted to add something to what Pierre Gans said about the opinion pieces and commentaries and satire and so on. Also, we in our code make this comparison. We have our Article 5, and I'm very glad that the relation is made to the factual basis. What we are saying is commentaries, opinion pieces, columns, or cartoons offer the journalist more scope to give his opinion and to draw conclusions from the facts, the reference to the factual basis, than in the case of factual reporting. So I think this is important. That's the reason why 2 years ago we have updated our ethical code. And this article, before 2019, was under the chapter of independence to stress the the freedom of speech. We moved it to the chapter of truthful reporting, just to emphasize that there need to be a relation to a factual basis. And we did it in our, let's call it fight against fake news, that you can't via a column or something spread fake news. But of course, the freedom of speech keeps very, very, very broad and important. And until now, we never upheld a complaint against an opinion piece or a cartoon. We got one complaint against the cartoon, one against satire on radio, and different complaints against opinion pieces, but we never upheld them. But we wanted to emphasize this relation to factual basis by moving this article, and it's still the same as before, from the chapter independence to the chapter in our code about factual reporting. That just I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Peter Feeney.
Thank you, Alex. I want to reassure Fritz that the quality of the humor is not an issue for press councils. It can be a bad joke or a good joke. You can't decide if the joke is funny or not. If it's satire or cartoon, you accept it's in the mode of comedy. And it's not for any press council to judge whether humor is funny or not funny. But going beyond that, I want to say that I think Pierre Gans is absolutely right. Satire and cartoons are part of opinion journalism. And the bar is raised very high for any breach. And as Peter Knappen said, he's never upheld a complaint about commentary. And I would share that view. I'm thinking of all the complaints I've dealt with about comedy or cartoons or satire. I've never upheld a complaint because I think the bar is very high to cause a breach. I think you can give offense provided you can justify that in terms of the insight the humor gives you. We have a principle 8 of our code about giving prejudice, and it says that you can breach the code if you give grave offense on certain grounds. But the word grave is in there very carefully because, of course, a cartoon can give offense. But you've got to measure that against the impact the cartoon has as a means of providing an insight into some aspect of contemporary society. So I would feel very comfortable that cartoonists and satirists have a greater degree of freedom than almost any other form of journalism. I also would add that editors, when they get complaints about cartoons or satire, they often offer the complainant a right of reply by the publication of a letter. And in many instances, this is contributing to public debate. And the offer of a publication of a letter, in my view, is frequently a sufficient action to resolve a complaint. And I won't go any further than that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think we all agree that for cartoons and satire, standards are much wider and broader. And it's very seldom that the press council says something satirical is a breach of the code, like the Germans did with the Pope caricature. But that is, rather an exception, I would say. So I think we have to come to an end. It's already 3:05. And I thank you very much, Fritz Jergitsch, that you joined us. It was very informative and interesting and also funny every now and then speaking to you. We hope that we keep in touch, and we wish you all the best for your magazine and for your book release, of course, as well.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was very interesting.
Thank you.